Okay. Okay, just to confirm that we're now in public session. So the meeting will be broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings. So just want to welcome to anyone watching online, and to just make sure that your phones are muted, and to be advised that no recording or photography of the meeting is allowed. So if members are content, we'll proceed with the agenda. Just ask them. Okay. Gentlemen, apologies, could you just sit back for a little minute and I'll bring you forward when we're ready on the agenda, if that's okay. You can maybe leave your stuff on the table, but I'll call you forward then when we're ready to hear your evidence. Okay, thank you very much. We're just going to go through the business of the committee first. Okay, so we have no apologies, apart from Claire, who says she'll be maybe 30 minutes late and she'll be joining remotely. So have members any declarations of interest to declare? No? Oh, okay. Okay, so chairperson's business. So just to advise that Roisin Kelly has joined the team to clerk the committee for the coming weeks, and just to welcome you. I think a lot of you will know Roisin, and to just like to thank Michael for his work and wish him well in his new work that he has been asked to undertake by the Assembly. Okay, so members, you will have received a memo from the Clerk Assistant in the table papers this morning, and if members are content, I will deal with this now under Chairperson's business. So there is a copy. I was only came in then a couple of hours ago, so there is a copy at everybody's desk. Okay, so the Clerk Assistant wrote to us this morning to draw to our attention a data breach that has occurred in the course of collecting information for the inquiry into gaps in equality legislation. A member of the Assembly contacted the clerk to this committee, previous clerk, to indicate that the personal information of a relatively small number of inquiry respondents had been published. The information that was published included email addresses, gender and age bands. Officials moved as quickly as possible to remove any information that they considered personal out of the public domain, and urgent work is currently taking place to meet the Assembly Commission's statutory duties, and that the process is live at present. The data breach has been reported to the Information Commissioner's Office. The breach itself is not an outworking nor the responsibility of the Committee for the Executive Office, and is a matter for the Assembly Commission with regards to statutory duties. However, given the understandable interest and concern on this matter, the Clerk Assistant thought it was essential that she brought this update to your attention today. The information concerned will be republished in line with the privacy notice in due course. Are members content to note this memo?
Great. Chair, could I ask a couple of questions on it?
Yes.
If possible, do we know how long the personal data was online for?
I think that this is a live investigation. We really do need to allow the Assembly Commission and the Information Commissioner's Office to deal with that. We will be receiving an update shortly, but in terms of those finer details, we don't have those.
I think it's important that even though there's a live investigation going on, that those that have had their data placed online, at the very least we should make sure from this committee that they have been informed accordingly. The personal data goes a wee bit further than what you've outlined.
Sorry, just recently to take advice from the clerk. Okay, so this has now been referred to the Information Commissioner's Office, and the Assembly Commission and the Assembly will take advice from them in terms of how they would notify anybody who may have been subject to the data breach.
Well, I certainly won't put in record my concerns, and yes, while there's a live investigation going on, if it's been an outside body has been responsible for uploading that data and putting it online, there's serious questions if they are carrying out other work for the Assembly, in case something similar has happened or will happen in the future. But my main concern is now that those that have had their data shared, that they are let know and are updated accordingly. Whether that's, if it's through the ICO, that's fair enough, but I think that's only right and proper that this committee shares them concerns and they are updated accordingly.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to add to that? No. Okay. Anybody else got any comments? Okay, no, thank you. Okay, so the draft minutes, members, they're found on pages 7 to 13 of your pack, and if you're content that these are a true reflection of the proceedings, go ahead and sign them. Okay,
Great.
content. So matters arising, so there are no matters arising, so we will move on, members, to item 6 which is our oral evidence session from the Ulster Human Rights Watch and Decorum NI. So, gentlemen, would you just like to come forward, please? Thank you. So just while you're taking your seats there, just advise members that the clerk's brief is found at page 16 of your pack, and at page 18 you'll find a briefing paper from the Ulster Human Rights Watch. So today in front of us we have David Crabb, who is the president of Decorum NI. We have got Robert Campbell, who's the chairperson of Ulster Human Rights Watch, and Axel Smits, if I've got that correct. Okay, Smith, advocacy support manager, also with Ulster Human Rights Watch. So we received a briefing from Ulster Human Rights Watch. I assume, David, you just want to speak to notes when you come to it. But if you can be as brief as possible, then we'll be able to get to the questions and get to the. Oh, thank you. Just changing some name plates around there. We'll get on with questions.
Change the back again.
Oh, sorry, was it correct?
Oh,
Apologies.
right, okay.
My apologies.
Okay.
Just you'd answered on.
I looked like a Schmidt.
You had answered on that matter, so my apologies.
Thank you. I'm actually going to invite David, maybe if you want to make some opening remarks first, because, yeah, is that fine? Okay.
I'm identifiable in the...
Yeah, thank you very much, David.
Okay.
Go ahead, thank you.
Chair, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to engage with the committee here today. Perhaps I'll just begin very briefly by explaining who Decorum NI are, what we are, and what we're about very briefly. We provide welfare support and advocacy for those who served under Operation Banner, which was the Army's term for the deployment between August 1969 and July 2007. So anyone who served in the armed forces, the police, or the prison service, and very importantly their families, for we believe they too served in their own way. Decorum has been in existence since 2015. We were previously a part of the Northern Ireland Phoenix organisation, of which I was chair, which was funded under EU peace funds from 2008 to 2014. Rather than go into a lot of detail, Chair, I have some leaflets and flyers here which I'll leave with the clerk, which will give a further explanation of who we are and what we're about.
You do it, perfect.
We have a diverse membership of almost 1,000 coming from across all areas of Northern Ireland and beyond. I should explain that I chose not to submit a written paper, and this was primarily because, as I mentioned, we have a diverse membership and there's not universal agreement on all aspects of legacy or how it's handled, or indeed how it should be handled. But there are large areas of agreement, and I'll try to reflect as many views as I can, but it would have been difficult, or at least unwieldy, to put it all into writing. So that's the reason. So apologies for that. I hope that's understandable. In terms of the Legacy Act, we have been broadly disappointed and indeed I think angered in the way it's been handled over the past couple of years. Like many others, a principal concern was, cause of the anger was the so-called earned immunity aspects of the Legacy Act, not least because this was portrayed as being done to protect veterans. I can state with clarity that the overwhelming majority of veterans living in Northern Ireland did not want, nor indeed feel, that they needed this protection. Indeed, it was viewed as a perversion of the law and went against the ethos of what those who served stood for and what their role was in upholding law and order. So we very much welcome the fact that this aspect of the Act has been struck down. Within our constituency, we have two categories of people who potentially would engage with the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Retrieval. Firstly, there are those evidence givers, those veterans who were involved in or witnessed incidents that will be investigated by the ICRIR. And secondly, the bereaved families, those families of members of the security forces who have been killed, of which there are over 500 potential cases to be dealt with. In the former group, the evidence givers, they want to be assured that they will be treated fairly and that the full application of the context in which they found themselves at the time of the particular incidents is fully taken into account. For the bereaved families, they want to ensure a fulsome, open and transparent investigation that will provide the answers to the questions they seek. Engagement with the ICRIR will inevitably involve re-traumatisation, and thus support for those engaging is a vital necessity. It's appreciated that the ICRIR have put some effort into adopting a trauma-based approach, the so-called TRIM approach, Trauma Resilience Informed Model, but support is needed for those engaging, not just for the term of the engagement or the time of the engagement, but through and beyond it. And it needs to be enduring in that aspect. And it cannot be left for the already overstretched victims and survivors groups to pick up the pieces in this regard. Now, we understand that the ICRIR have been in touch and been negotiating with the VSS about how this might be provided, but have yet to produce a model in that respect. So that's an ongoing concern. It's felt that many of the families are waiting to see how the ICRIR is going to operate. So there's a slow burn, and as you may be aware, the figures already being dealt with by the NIO or by the ICRIR are low, and we believe that a lot of people are waiting to see how cases are handled and what the outcomes are. This could potentially feed into another area of concern within our constituency, and that is the skewing of the narrative of the conflict, whereby the majority of cases highlighted will be those that are involving deaths that have been caused by those acting on behalf of the state. And this also will relate to the majority of inquests and civil cases if they are brought back in, as it looks likely they will be. This means there potentially can be a 90% focus on less than 10% of the overall deaths in the Troubles. Another point in relation to the ICRIR is we believe the term reconciliation shouldn't be in their title. Reconciliation, there is no agreed definition of what it is. The Commission refuses, understandably, to create a definition for that. If there is no definition, it cannot be measured. And reconciliation will mean different things to different people at different times. So we believe it's a misnomer to have it in there at this point. A final point I just want to make is in relation to the memorialisation aspect of the Act and the quest to produce a definitive narrative of the conflict. Very little, if anything, has been done by the NIO on this thus far. We believe it's something that needs to be handled very carefully, and there needs to be full and widespread consultation in relation to this. It needs to be produced in such a way as to provide a better education and understanding to enable future generations to learn from what happened. And whilst it will require academic rigour, it should not be a case of academics writing for academics. It needs to be balanced and accessible to all. In Decorum, we have a strapline, which is remembering the past, building the future. We want to ensure that our grandchildren, their children and their grandchildren learn in a factual and balanced way of what we endured as a society during the dark days of the Troubles. We believe that everybody's entitled to their opinion, but not their own facts. I'll leave it there, Chair. That's a very quick skate across the horizon from our perspective, and of course we'll be happy to answer any and all questions from the committee.
Okay, if you don't mind, we'll take your opening statement and then we'll do questions. So thank you, gentlemen. One of you want to go ahead.
Mrs. Chairperson, we would like to thank you for inviting us to come before you today. By way of introduction, I would say I am Axel Schmidt, the Advocacy Service Manager, and on my left-hand side here is Mr. Robert Campbell, the Chairman of the Ulster Human Rights Watch. Ulster Human Rights Watch was established as a company with charity status in 2002 to promote, defend, and protect human rights on the basis of a Judeo-Christian interpretation of human rights. Until 2022, its chairman was Sir William Wright, and since then, Mr. Campbell, who used to be managing director, has taken over that position. In 2013, Ulster Human Rights Watch created an advocacy service to assist and support victims of terrorism from every section of our community in Northern Ireland in their quest for justice, truth, acknowledgement, and reconciliation, especially at a time when many feel they have been forgotten by society at large and also by the government of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. I would say, first of all, a word about the Executive Office strategy for victims and survivors, and then I will move on to the second point, which is dealing with the legacy of the past. Concerning the Executive Office strategy for victims and survivors, we believe that reference should have been made to the victims of terrorism, who are the largest group of people who lost their lives or suffered injury because of acts of terrorism during the Troubles. A clear distinction should have been made between victims of terrorism, who are victims of crime, and perpetrators of acts of terrorism. This would have allowed their needs to be considered, respected, and provided for in the future. The strategy should have enabled victims of terrorism, including former members of the security forces, to have access to quality trauma-informed services in a safe and secure environment. The strategy could have featured victims of terrorism at its heart in order to contribute to a peaceful and democratic society free from terrorism. It should have sought to comply with the European Convention on Human Rights, the prevention of radicalization approach of the European Union, and the objective of reconciliation stated in the Northern Ireland Legacy and Reconciliation Act 2023. The strategy could have promoted the commemoration of the European Day of Remembrance of Victims of Terrorism and prevented the justification and glorification of terrorism and the radicalization of younger generations. Moving on now to the second point of dealing with the legacy of the past. Ulster Human Rights Watch has engaged with the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery because it has the potential for dealing with the legacy of the past in order to recover information, pursue criminal investigation, and provide the names of perpetrators on a balance of probability. I'm going to mention 3 points. The first one is about acknowledgement of victims of terrorism, the second about the convention-compliant investigations, and the third one, the cooperation from the Republic of Ireland. On the first point, in relation to acknowledgement of victims of terrorism, to deal efficiently with the legacy of the past, we believe that victims of terrorism must be acknowledged in the legislation that applies to the legacy of the past in Northern Ireland. The importance of a definition of victims that distinguishes them from perpetrators is emphasized in the United Nations Basic Principles and Guidelines on the rights to a remedy and reparation for victims of gross violations of international human rights law of 16 December 2005. It states that perpetrators of offences cannot have the same status as those who are the victims of acts or omissions that constitute offences. As a result, terrorists should not be treated on a par with victims of crime or enjoy the rights that these victims are entitled to, as is sadly the case in Northern Ireland due to the interpretation of victim provided in the Victims and Survivors Northern Ireland Order 2006. Acknowledging victims of terrorism during the Troubles so as to ensure their needs are provided for and their rights protected requires that the definition of victim of crime that is provided in Section 29 of the Justice Act Northern Ireland 2015 be applied to them also without discrimination. On the second point of convention-compliant investigations, concerning the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery, the major issue that could justify opposition to its work, namely the immunity to be given to perpetrators that was mentioned by Mr. Crabb, has been removed following the Dillon versus the Secretary of State case. We therefore believe that there is currently no good reason to oppose the work of the ICRIR pending the outcome of ongoing investigations. Our position is reinforced by the Dillon judgment, which recognizes that the Commission has the power to carry out Articles 2 and 3 compliant investigations and states that it is an improvement on the situation in relation to inquests. As a result, we oppose the reinstatement of inquest, which would be a misuse of public money, since the Northern Ireland Trouble, Legacy and Reconciliation Act 2023 provides more beneficial arrangements for historical investigations to be carried out than they are under Section 14.1 of the Coroners Act, Northern Ireland, 1959. On the last point about the cooperation from the Republic of Ireland, one of the major issues which is of serious concern and that remains to be addressed urgently is the absence of cooperation by the Republic of Ireland with the ICRIR in order to successfully address the legacy of the past. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. So, just to pick up on that last point, Axel, and for those watching online, next week we will be getting a briefing from RAISE, which is the Assembly's research team, on legacy in relation to the roles and responsibilities of the Irish government. So hopefully we'll be able to share that research with yourselves once we've received it ourselves and spoken to it. Okay, so I'm actually going to start with you first, David, and I really appreciate your commentary there around the Legacy Act. My father-in-law served here during the Troubles as a colonel in the army, and there were a lot of people who served with dignity and honour, and I think that we have to ensure that we focus on those people who did any wrongdoing and respect those people who came here and served with purpose and dignity. So I just want to talk to you about, you've said there around the Legacy Act itself in terms of the removal of the word reconciliation, and obviously from the other party's point of view, we want to see what reconciliation looks like for everybody. So could you speak to me about what your membership group would like to see in terms of reconciliation?
Yeah, I think it does have its part to play in the reconciliation process. And what Sir Declan has said, and I can understand this, he looks back to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which is very short on reconciliation, a couple of lines, and it basically talks about acknowledging the hurt and the damage done, and that this needs to be dealt with. That's really what the Belfast Good Friday Agreement says. Sir Declan says that their role will be to uncover the hurt and lay it bare, if you like, and then it's for others to deal with it. So in a sense he's saying they won't be dealing with reconciliation, but they'll be contributing to a process, and that's what we feel as well. It's part of a process. Different people will be at different stages of their own personal journeys on that process. I suppose it also could lead to the difference between, I don't want to get into a philosophical discussion here about conciliation and reconciliation. Conciliation and removing the hurt, if you like, or taking the sting out of things and laying down facts. Reconciliation is dealing with those facts and moving on to a position on that. I've had many discussions about what reconciliation might mean, and as many people in this room will be as many views as there are. But one which was given to me by Right Reverend David Porter is probably as close as you'll get. It's where someone can give you your narrative in a way that you would appreciate and understand, so they can reflect your narrative to you in a way to appreciate and understand. But within that there are things like acceptance and forgiveness and things like that, which get into a wider thing. So it's a very difficult area, I think, to nail down, and a very difficult area to measure. And I think it's really for individuals to measure their own progress on a reconciliation route. There's a broader society reconciliation, obviously, which we need to get, and things like the memorialisation aspects of the Act, I think, will be a major contributor to that there, because it's about understanding. So if you can understand somebody's perspective, why they did what they did, walk a mile in their shoes, as it were, that you can learn from that a lot more. So I've mentioned before at this committee the lack of dialogue that there is, and the lack of opportunity for dialogue to gain an understanding of the differing perspectives of the conflict. And I think that's why that particular aspect needs to be very carefully handled, to ensure that it is the most useful tool and probably the biggest contributor towards reconciliation.
No, thank you. I suppose there's a particular question that I want to pick up with you, and I'll read it across to the other gentleman, and that was around the regional trauma network and the access to the services. And so in the Victims and Survivors strategy, they talk about ensuring that there's a trauma-informed approach to this, and that they will remove barriers, improving access and awareness of services and alleviating barriers to accessing services for victims and survivors. Are there any, the people again that you are involved with, what do they talk about in terms of what the barriers are to confidence in the service, for example?
A lot of the barriers are, for our members, going down a trusted path to receive the services they need. So there needs to be an empathy. If somebody is dealing with a mental health issue, for example, which many of them are, that empathy is lightly resourced, or not as well resourced as it could be. So if somebody's going into a counselling session, they need to be, those people who are carrying out the counselling need to be able to understand the language, the terminology, and things like that they will use. They also need to understand the context in which those people served, and the stresses and strains and contributory factors that are on that. So it's that aspect. It's wrong to call it niche, but it needs to be bespoke. Yep. In terms of providing a fulsome service to those. And it'll be the same in other areas. It'll be the same for example, other blue light services and things like that. The same would apply. So it's that empathetic approach that's needed there. And the capacity just isn't there. And it needs to be, in terms, we'll probably talk about the strategy briefly, the resourcing of it needs to be there. Yes, the Regional Trauma Network is up and running in pilot form. Appears to be making good headway. I've yet to be fully convinced of the full accessibility for it, although aspects look good for it. But it's not the panacea for all ills. It needs to be broader and wider than that.
Okay, we'll just ask if one of you want to respond to that as well, in terms of accessing not necessarily the Regional Trauma Network, but other support for the people you work with.
Well, the first point I need to make very clear to you is that we don't, as an advocacy service, deal with health and well-being issues. We have a memorandum of understanding with other organizations, like the COM, for example, and Ailey Center, and therefore we refer the clients who come to us to deal with their own case to these organizations who can provide the support necessary from a health and well-being point of view. The only remark I will make is that what I have heard is that members of the security forces usually would be quite reluctant to use the normal channel to get the health and the well-being support for only security reasons. Okay. That's all I can say.
Okay, so I've just one last one from me, and then I'll move on to the Deputy Chair. And that was, at the start of the Ulster Human Rights Watch briefing, then they suggested that some of the amendments that you had put forward as part of the consultation for the new strategy had not been taken into consideration. And so I read your submission, and then I read the strategy, and I felt that a lot of it, maybe just different language, different prose was used, but I did feel that some of it had been picked up. But I suppose one area that I think wasn't picked up, and that was the European Day of Remembrance of Victims of Terrorism, whilst we have that Day of Reflection. So I'm just wondering, how important is that as we, as a Northern Irish society, do reflect and give more prominence to that day? Do you want to speak to that, please?
Well, I think the key point, which is the key issue, in fact, from which flows all the difficulties we have in dealing with the legacy of the past, is that there is a constant confusion between the perpetrators and the victims of crimes who are victims of terrorism. Now, we represent and we work for the largest group of victims, obviously, those who were either civilians or members of the security forces who became the victims of acts of terrorism. And therefore, we believe that if we want to move forward, we should have, first of all, a clear distinction between the two group of people, the victims of terrorism on one side and the perpetrators on the other. And one of the key issue and important issue in relation to dealing with the past is, especially because of what has happened here in Northern Ireland, which is unique in the whole of Europe, is really to remember the impact of terrorism that it has on individuals, but on the society at large. And that's why it should be very important for us as a society to acknowledge that day and to take part into that day and to have it acknowledged within the strategy.
Thank you. Go ahead, please, Deputy Chair.
And thank you to everybody for your presentation so far. David, thank you particularly for the words that you gave to us today, particularly around where you're saying that in terms of the Legacy Act, veterans don't want protection. And I think that's both welcome, open and very honest in respect of this. And I think it goes back to the point the Chair made in respect of all of those who served here in Northern Ireland. The vast majority of people did that lawfully and within the law. And for those who didn't, then I think there has to be appropriate investigations. Do you therefore believe that the ICRIR is the best vehicle to deliver that?
It is a vehicle that can potentially deliver that. Does that sound woolly enough? It's the best vehicle would be a Canova type investigation, but resourcing that is problematic, and I understand that. But the fundamental approaches that were adopted by the Canova investigation, I feel, should be adopted as far as possible by the RCRIR. If they do that, then I believe it will go a long way to being an open, transparent and fulsome investigatory body. But we only have words at the moment, and we can only judge by outcomes as they happen. They're doing what they can to build trust in it, but I think ultimately it'll be the outcomes which will garner that trust or not, as the case may be. And
whatever side of this argument you're coming from, rightly or wrongly, it is clear that the courts are ultimately chipping away at all of that and the current situation that we are in. That inevitably looks like taking us back to a court-based, inquiry-based system, which many people trust implicitly, which people tell us that's the best system that's out there. Canova, I agree with you. And if we want the truth, and if we want the truth for everyone, then it has to be that gold-plated standard which was delivered by that. And if there's a cost to that, that is a cost which I believe we have to bear.
I agree.
Thank you.
Okay. Carol, please.
Thank you. Nice to see you again. So we're having the ICRIR not next week, so just to, if you haven't seen the forward work programme. But, and obviously we're looking at the whole issue of legacy because it's part of the committee, but we've also got an inquiry into gaps and equality, which is why you're here today. In relation to the whole Legacy Act, and in particularly the repeal of it, am I right in saying that you are in favour of the repeal of the Legacy Act? First of all,
yes. Broadly speaking, yes. We're pleased to see the striking down of the earned immunity aspect. We have yet to see what else it brings, that repeal brings. So it's an unknown at the moment as to what the NIO's plans are and what the Secretary of State's plans are in terms of that repeal and replace. It's the replacement bit that we don't know yet. But we do feel...
I think we're all in that boat.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's a wait and see from that point of view, but it did need changed, yes.
Okay. And then the ICRIR, in terms of its independence, have you any concerns about that?
Again, I would judge it on its outcomes. As it stands at the moment, it is said to be compliant, and I believe that is the case. So we kind of take that as its word, as it stands in law at the moment. So, as I said, it's not perfect, but the other sense is it's kind of the only show in town.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people have a reluctant pragmatism in saying that we may get involved because our options are limited as to what other way we'll find out the answers to the questions we have. We've had HET and LIB and all of those things before. They didn't necessarily provide the answers they needed. The one other critical aspect that I would say that Axel's already mentioned is the role of the Republic of Ireland. And in the repeal, what I would like to see is a statutory or an international agreement whereby the Republic of Ireland would agree to participate fully in their investigations, and for An Garda Síochána to do the same, which they broadly speaking do when it's an investigation, but not when it's a review. So I think
or
there's
inquiry,
or an inquiry,
yeah.
So I think that needs to be, and I think Sir Declan himself is on record as saying that needs to be in there. So we'll be interested and keen to see, what way that plays out, because as we say, it should be a fulsome, open, and transparent investigation in all cases.
And in relation to victims of conflict, getting access to services that are bespoke for them. And I don't want to mention an organisation because I don't want anybody taking that as being critical. I'm not. No. But I do appreciate the need for bespoke services because regardless what way you come at this, you have articulated that there's a need for people with confidence to talk about how the conflict's impacted you. Equally, people who've been impacted by the state want to go and talk. So I think that's something that's agreed across the board. So in essence, what additional support have you identified that is needed that's not currently there?
A bit of one word: resourcing. Okay. It is as simple and straightforward as that. The problem we have is that the statutory sector can't handle things, even if it was acceptable for members of our constituency to go forward in that, simply because they can only maybe, for example, have 6 sessions with a community psychiatric nurse and that's it. Mm-hmm. Then you're left to your own devices. And that can be more damaging than it does do good, because you're opening a can of worms and you can't put that lid back on the can again. Yeah. So that is a real concern. I talked about enduring support in terms of the ICRIR. we need to be able to provide enduring support throughout, and that means not just in for example, counselling, but in social support thereafter. That's something our organisation does, but more need to be able to do that. So it's to provide safe havens, to provide somewhere where people can go, to provide a reason to get out through the door in many cases where there's social isolation and things like that, all of which impacts on mental health. So there's not the capacity to deal with it. There are not enough counsellors, there are not enough access to counsellors, and it's smoothing and greasing that access is the key thing. And you're right, it needs to be bespoke in many different areas. And I've spoken with groups across the board, shall we say, including people like Coister and others, and the problems are the same.
So, and that's my final question, Chair. So, Relatives for Justice, I'm sure you've met them, David.
Yeah.
I'm sure you all have, but they employed or procured even the services of clinical psychologists because of the transgenerational impacts of trauma resulting from post-traumatic stress. And without that, as we all know, the system statutory provision not only is very hard to access, but when you do access it, it's very, very limited. And even with the services that are provided at the minute, there's only, as you say, a half a dozen sessions. And that, in respect, is finding out what your granny's name is. That's not getting into anything else. So when you say capacity, is it capacity with their own organisations, and or is it capacity within both community and voluntary sector as well as statutory sector? What additionality do you think needs to happen?
All of the above
Okay.
is what I would say. I mean, I know that's a bland and simple answer, and I agree with you fully about the transgenerational things. I think that's something that is only starting to be more fully appreciated, and that really does need to be tackled going down the line. So, people who served in the conflict, putting it crudely, are dying away, but their children and their children's children were equally as affected, and that needs to be addressed. So it's not something that's going to be short term. It needs to be long term. It needs to be inbuilt, and it needs to be there for the future and beyond.
Have you anything to add to that?
I would just like to say, from the Ulster Human Rights Watch point of view, we are looking upon it that we will operate with it until such times as we see it as fit for purpose. We've
That's
had
the ICIR?
Pardon? The ICR.
Okay,
sorry,
right.
Sorry. We've had meetings with them, are fairly happy to go ahead at the moment and see what happens. But I think the point that was brought up a few minutes ago about cost is going to be a serious one, because when you talk about the depth that they're going into, and at the moment there are something like only about 26 cases and only 2 have been addressed at the moment, and here we are a year and a half into it, we can see that there's going to be if it's going to be meaningful, it's going to have to be very seriously looked at from staffing, resources and finance. We have in meetings very positive at the beginning, but the more you probe, you realise that it's going to cost a lot of money, a lot of time, and it's going to be very difficult. If you look at they mention about 200 cases, and they're sitting with 26 that they're actually operating on very little effort at the moment, or very little results at the moment. We just, it's a wait and see. But we will be prepared to work with them, accept what's there, until we see how it goes and how the legacy is amended.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you, Chair.
And Brian,
Thank you.
please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your attendance today and for the work you do in support of victims of terrorism and members of the security forces, the vast majority of whom served with honour and impartially to protect us all from terrorism, and many paid the ultimate price, made the ultimate sacrifice, and we acknowledge them. I want to ask you a bit further about the ICRIR. All parties opposed the Legacy Act, not least, as you've said, because of the prospect of earned immunity. I think it's fair to say most parties are prepared to give the ICRIR a try, and as you have said yourselves, to see let it prove itself one way or the other, and because there's no other prospect currently. Can you say a bit more? You've referenced the relatively low numbers who've come forward, and how others are waiting to see. Are you hearing directly from people who you think will come forward to it, or is there anything you could say that you think would cause more people to come forward to the ICRIR?
I think people will come forward eventually to it, if kind of the status quo remains, and a lot will depend on the replacement part of the repeal. Mm-hmm. So how that will look, we don't know, but certainly, well, there's two categories. There are a lot of families who are ground down and weary after maybe 30, 40, 50 years even, and they perhaps don't want to start opening up again. But then there's also the transgenerational bit, where you do have a second and third generation wanting to find out answers for that, and rightly so. They're, it's an entitlement they have. So yes, there are people who still want answers, but they are going to wait, and I'm not sure that there's anything can be done immediately to give that assurance that they need, that it's going to be in accordance with their wishes, and it's going to provide the answers that they're seeking. I commend the ICRIR for what they've done in their outreach so far. Leslie Carroll and Deborah Howe have done a very good job and been very willing to meet with many and all groups, who've asked to meet with them, to try and give as much reassurance as possible. But that will only take it so far, and it really will be an outcome-based decision, I think, for most families.
I just, before you ask your next question, would you like to respond to that as well, either of you, Axel or Robert?
Yes, certainly. The reason for us, for the Ulster Human Rights Watch, to oppose the bill, at the time it was a bill, was that it didn't appear to us to be European Convention compliant. And therefore we submitted 13 amendments that should be made to the bill in order to make it conform to the ECHR, and especially in particular Article 2. Now, we know that there has been two court cases, one with the trial judge in February last year, the other one with the Court of Appeal in September. Now, both these courts have acknowledged that these arrangements that are provided for by the Act 2023 provides for a commission that is Article 2 and 3 compliant. I'm just reading here from the judgment. The court is satisfied that the provision of the Act leaves sufficient scope for the ICRIR to conduct an effective investigation as required under Articles 2 and 3 CHR. So there is no issue there. That was, of course, the big and the main issue was about immunity, and that has been lifted now. So we're all clear about that. Now, the Court of Appeal has raised another, or rather, the issue was raised before the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal had to deal with that. That was the involvement of next of kin in in-depth investigation. And at that point, the Court of Appeal made a declaration that this needs to be addressed by the remedial order that is being put forth and forward by the Secretary of State in order to precisely provide for the involvement of the next of kin. And but I mean, apart from that, both courts are satisfied that this commission can provide in-depth investigation that are human rights compliant. So therefore, as Robert Campbell said, we are engaging with the Commission, and so far we can see that there is a real commitment to do things as much as possible human rights compliant, and we of course see the outcome of the investigation and judge our position, reassess our position in relation to what will come out from these investigations carried out by the Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just say there's just two words. One is trust and the other is outcomes. That's the only thing that's ever going to make it. And they have so many times been brought up the hill and let down.
Yeah.
And that's what's keeping it back. So it's proof of the pudding, and that's what it is.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for those answers. I was going to ask, but I think you've already answered about support services, where it said in your paper, I think from the Human Rights Office actually, about wanting them to be in a safe and secure manner, support services. But I think you think it needs to be in an appropriate setting and maybe delivered for members of the security forces through a service within. I think that family is what you're saying, within an appropriate body.
Empathetic to it, at least.
Yes, so people aren't having to explain the whole context. Yeah, and I did want to. You also mentioned about a definitive narrative of the Troubles. So I'm not familiar with that. Is that being worked on, or are there other ways?
It is part of the Act, in that there's the memorialisation aspect of the Act, and the proposals are to appoint designated people who will take forward the provision or the building of a narrative and also an oral history archive for the entire conflict. And there will be thematic approaches within that as well. But is it being worked on? No, is a straightforward answer. The NIO, I suppose it's not the crocodile nearest the boat as far as they're concerned in terms of the Legacy Act. They're trying to get the ICRIR sorted first. But we feel it's a very, very important aspect and needs to be handled with care. There can only be one real shot at this, and it needs to be got right. Measure twice and cut once is what we say.
And given that time is against us, as you
absolutely,
said, is work taking place to capture those stories?
Well, various organisations across the board have done, for example, oral histories and recorded histories and lived experiences and things like that. But this proposal is to bring it in a concerted and wholesome way, join all the dots together, and create it in the context of that narrative. But yes, there's work being done elsewhere. National Museums Northern Ireland have done some work on it as well, and others. So yes, it's ongoing, but the idea of this is to bring it all together into one space.
Anything on that?
Yes, that is a very important aspect of the whole of the legislation. There are two parts in that legislation, the Act 2023. One deals with all the investigation aspect and the ICRIR, and the other is about the memorialization of the past. Now, whatever comes out of this commission, reports that will eventually come out of it, obviously will feed into the memorialization of the past. And that's why it's so important to get it right, to provide a balanced approach to what happened in the past. In relation to what you have just mentioned there, are there oral archives or narratives being created? Yes, there are. And we have ourselves created the Legacy of the Past record within the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland in order to regroup these narratives from victims of terrorism by way of written narratives, but also by way of audio-visuals recordings. And so these are now accessible through the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, and they are being revised, checked, so that there are no allegations made, fanciful allegations, but rather based on facts. So that is a very important aspect, yes, of the legislation and what needs to be done, in fact, not only to inform about the past, but to educate And that should be the purpose of what we do, really, to educate the younger generation so that what happened in the past will not reoccur in the future.
Okay, thank you. Timothy, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for coming along. A couple of things, if I may, pull out from the Ulster Human Rights Watch in the paper that you have submitted. Very much welcome that, you know, throughout your presentation, throughout your submission, you're making a clear distinction between innocent victims and the victim makers or perpetrators, as you refer to within your paper. On page 2 of your submission, when you were dealing with the Executive Office Strategy for Victims and Survivors and the amendments that you put in, the prevention of the justification and glorification of terrorism, one of the key major priorities should have been included in the strategy was to prevent the justification and glorification of terrorism and the radicalisation of younger generations. This is something I'm very concerned about. There's many a weekend that I would turn on my social media and you see people, whether it's at different concerts or out on a Saturday night at a local pub, and all you hear is ooh ah, up there ah, and different songs like that coming from the Wolf Tones. People might think that's innocent, but to me that's glorification of terrorism, and that's something that I believe as a society should never be accepted. The same way when you look at a sporting organisation that still has cups named after terrorists, you know, that's something, if we are serious about this issue, if them organisations are serious about addressing the hurt of the past, they need to really look at themselves and take action and clean out their own backyard. But on that, can you give me your thoughts on what the executive has done to date in this issue? You know, you felt strongly putting in your amendment. Has the executive failed to take a real clear stance on this?
I think the answer to that question is certainly yes. We speak about terrorism today. There is not even mention of the word terrorism in the whole of the strategy. So I think the approach is wrong in the sense that even what we have as an interpretation of victims and survivors in the Order 2006 is being replicated nowhere in the world. It only exists here in Northern Ireland, and it contradicts completely and entirely even our own legislation, the Justice Act 2015, which provides for a definition of victim of crime, and also go against all the international conventions, which I have mentioned earlier on, like the UN guidance that I was referring to. So therefore, yes, the approach has not been right, and that's why we are constantly having this problem of needing to bring the distinction between victims of crimes and perpetrators in order to address the real issues and to provide for the people who need it.
Why do you think that's the case? Is it because we have a First Minister that says there is no alternative? Is that the root and the heart of the problem here? Where we have somebody that's in the First Minister post who still goes to glorify and commemorate terrorists who butchered and killed our kith and kin throughout the length and breadth of this country. Is that why we're going in the wrong direction with this?
Well, I think we're going in the wrong direction because we don't have the proper laws being implemented. And if, for example, we were to review entirely this Order 2006 and provide for a definition of victim and survivors, which is based on the Justice Act 2015, which is itself based on the direction and the directive that was provided in Europe, which is also referred to in the judgment that has been issued by the Court of Appeal. If we were really to be serious about that, yes, we would have the right basis in law in order to address these issues and of course to prevent then the glorification of terrorism or whatever justification that is provided for terrorism in the past. And so we could really oppose it efficiently and address these issues so that to ensure that what happened in the past will not reoccur in the future.
If we could move on, the Chair touched upon it regarding the annual day of reflection on the 21st of June, and you're very clear the issues that you have with it, shared acts of commemorative activity, which basically lumps, once again, victims with the perpetrators. On that basis, we have the European Day of Remembrance for Victims of Terrorism. Is there more that this committee should be doing? There's a picture up in the office where this building has been lit up red. Would it give more of a signal, say, of that, instead of coming from an individual member, that came from this committee, that to mark the International or the European Day of Remembrance for Victims of Terrorism, that this committee put that proposal forward? Do you think that would send a clear message that the committee and the members of the Assembly are on the side of innocent victims?
Certainly.
Yeah. You had also raised concerns about the cooperation of the Republic of Ireland. I've mentioned this a number of times at committee. Can you just give us some more of an understanding of how big a problem you see that being as we look to address the issues of legacy within Northern Ireland? Are they a big stumbling block? Are they proactively refusing to share information? Can you just give some more background to that, Axel, if possible?
Well, what I can say from the cases we have been dealing with is that we deal with cases that involve or have involved the Republic of Ireland in one way or another, in the sense that either the bombs were made in the Republic, or the perpetrators were in the Republic, came over the border, and then found refuge in the Republic of Ireland. So we have to deal with these cases, and what we need is a genuine, honest, and in fact, complete cooperation from the Republic of Ireland in relation to open the murder boxes that are on the other side of the border in order to help the ICIRR to provide the real answers to the questions that are being put to them by the requesters.
Do you want to add to that, David, regarding the problems with the Republic of Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the number of murders that took place in border areas, Fermanagh, South Tyrone, Armagh, South Armagh and South Down, there's no doubt that there was a strong cross-border element to those, and those aspects have not been fully investigated heretofore. We will look with interest to see how the Republic of Ireland engage with the OMA inquiry, which is ongoing. It's the first time they've agreed to engage with an inquiry here in the north, so that will be an indication, I think, of what willingness that there might be. But there are many instances, and one can think of Warren Point and other major instances, where there was a significant element of cross-border questions to be answered that remain unanswered to this day.
And if I could just one final point regarding the victims' payment schemes. Do you believe that they are delivering, or that scheme is delivering for victims of terrorism?
Very slowly. It's taking now 2.5 years for individual cases, 2.5 to 3 years even in some cases, to be dealt with. So they're going through very, very slowly indeed. And that is traumatic as well for the individuals involved. It's the garnering of information is the main issue. I think the Payments Board are probably honestly doing their best endeavours, but getting the relevant information is a sticking point. A concern we do have on a broader range is that when we get to the majority of cases having been fully paid out, that an outcome of that will be that there will be reduced funding for services currently provided, because they felt they're not needed because those people have been paid off in that sense. and the reality is the opposite, because need is increasing, because the demographics, the age profiles and things like that there are increasing, and need is increasing. So we would not like to see a corollary of a successful conclusion to the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme being that there's a reduction in funding elsewhere for services to be provided. That need is going to increase and needs to be fully and properly resourced. It is slowly grinding on and providing some respite, but it's very, very slow, and it's whilst we welcome the extensions and all of that, it's painfully slow, especially for those involved. And most people can't do it without help. And it's, organisations like ourselves who are, seeking to provide that help. But it's painfully slow.
Axel, Robert, have you any thoughts on?
I would say that we have been in support of the victim payment scheme because it does exclude those who committed the most serious offences during the Troubles, criminal offences, terrorist offences. So these people being excluded, then it leaves the possibility for genuine victims of terrorism to apply for that scheme. However, there are two categories of people that have not been fully provided for through that scheme, and these are the widows of those who were murdered and the children also who lost their parents. And so we have made representation with the Victim Payments Board, and we hope that there would be another interpretation given to being present at the incident that would allow these two categories of people to benefit from that scheme. So we're still looking forward to that in the future.
Could I just say, back to Mr. Gaston's first point, we go back to 2002 when there was a proposal for human rights in Northern Ireland. The word terrorism didn't appear in that document after 40 ongoing years of brutal terrorism in this country. The word terrorism wasn't even mentioned. This document, the word terrorism is mentioned again, and the victims will look at it and say, from their point of view, are they serious? Will they not even admit we have terrorism? If our political leaders and the people who are making the rules will not mention the name terrorism, they doubt very seriously whether they will get the proper recompense for what's happened. That's just a point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Finally, on my list, Harry, maybe else wants to go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and David, Axel and Robert. While you've suffered disappointment in your work and your task to hand, what more can you do now? And that's given huge appreciation for what you have done already. Thank you.
We would love to be able to do more, but we need to be resourced to be able to do more. We have grown as an organisation. I mentioned we started in 2015. We had about 250 members at that time. We're now sitting over 900 members, and we deal with more than just our membership, by the way. We have referrals from VSS and things like that we deal with. Within that time, for the past 7, maybe 8 years, our funding has been flatlined, which means that we're funded for the same 250 people as the 930 that we have at the moment. So that's a de facto cut in our resources. Now, we're not a heavily resource dependent organisation in that our resourcing goes into one permanent member of staff, and Peace Plus provides another health and wellbeing member of staff, and majority of the rent towards our premises and running costs, but not all of it. So we're self-financed for the rest of it. So VSS are getting a good bang for their buck with us, because we're a lot of it's self-funded, a lot of it's through volunteer work and things like that. So there's only so many volunteers that we can get on board, but There's also an increasing administration aspect with the Peace Plus monies and things like that, which isn't resourced. So, sorry, this is me venting. But, resourcing is the issue. We could do more, and we know that there is an increasing need. The vast majority, as this committee knows, the vast majority of victims and survivors are not involved in groups, and they're out there. But there will come a point in time where they may want to be and need to be involved with groups, and the capacity for those groups to be able to deal with them across the board needs to be there, and that can only happen if the full resourcing is there. And it's dangerously close to red lines every year, but through the goodwill of volunteers and others, and as I say, self-funding as far as we can go, we sort of get there and creep over the line every time, but we could do a lot more, and we will need to do a lot more in the future.
Well, we are pleased with the work we have done so far, but obviously there is a lot to be done still, and we're a very small organization, so obviously if we had more people being funded to work in our organization, we would be able to provide an extended more support, in fact, to other victims of terrorism. So basically that's the only thing which prevents us from doing more.
Can I say that as far as we're concerned, also, I have a concern. We're funded for a further 5 years, 4.5, 5 years. There is a concern that as the ICRIR goes forward and takes a number of these cases, that they will be directly dealing with people who they don't know, they don't know their background, etc. And there's a possibility that organisations like our own will be cut out of it and left with this one organisation dealing with it. And my concern and the concern of the executive is that we must ensure that the victims groups, constituted as they are at the moment, are fully resourced, at least to the level that they are at the moment, to ensure that they get an independent view of what's happening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, Sinead, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. Can I thank David, Robert and Axel for your presentations today. And I really maybe want to make a comment on it as well. I suppose, like everybody, I'm looking on at the OMA inquiry and just at the very rawness of the trauma that the testimonials are bringing out over the past 2 weeks. And I was particularly struck last night by the testimonials from the police and actually the first responders, and how that lived trauma is very much visible there. And I just want to say about memorialisation, I think everybody in our committee anyway know that this can be a very contested area for many victim groups. We're working with a lot of victim groups in relation to historical abuse and mother and baby institutions, and everybody and every victim group has an idea of what they would like to see in terms of memorialisation, and this is a significant area of focus within the Act as well. But I do think the oral history is really, really important, and I think it's really important not just for the victims of the past, which a lot of it is of the present, but it is for the future, that we learn from the past and learn, what the impact is for our society going forward. And I think that is an area that we as a committee need to kind of understand as well, and push to supporting that oral history and that oral evidence going forward as well. And I think it's the trauma of OMA inquiry as it stands today, and for those that give evidence in the last 2 weeks, is really painful. And I can understand that, when we look at the ICRIR, and some of, like, we don't support that as a party as well. We don't support that Legacy Act because we feel that there's more victims as a result of it for us going forward. So I just want to say I appreciate you coming before us and giving your evidence, and thank you for that.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much. As I say, next week we have a panel from ICRIR, and I hope you're able to watch online. But do keep in touch with the committee. Obviously, the NIO are consulting with political parties on the remedial orders, so please keep in touch. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, members, just while we get our next briefing set up, I'm just going to refer you to the clerk's brief at page 23 of your pack. Page 25, you'll find the departmental written briefing. And on page 29, you'll find the strategy for victims and survivors of the Troubles and conflict. Okay, gentlemen, thanks again.
Thank you.
Just say that there is a pack.
Oh yes, please.
For each one of you. Okay.
Very good.
Yeah, and the leaflets as well, that's right. Thank you. Okay, so we'll get those distributed after the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, so we have a departmental oral briefing now. Our next panel are all from the Victims and Survivors Unit at the Executive Office. So we're welcoming Patrick Gallagher, we are Sinead Brown and Julie Sherlow. So thank you and welcome back to committee. I just want to thank you as well for your written briefing, which was received in good time and is very, very useful in preparing for today. But if you'd like to make some opening remarks.
Okay, we have some hard copies as well for
good.
the committee, so I know everyone likes to have that in front of them sometimes.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you all for inviting us. We're very conscious this is the first opportunity for the committee to engage with us in this strategy, so we would really welcome views and feedback as we develop the action plans. So as you know, the new strategy for victims and survivors of the Troubles conflict was approved by ministers and received executive endorsement in October 2024. And this strategy marks the latest milestone in improving support for victims and survivors and aims to build on the progress and arrangements currently in place. So our approach to designing and developing this strategy has been one of collaborative design and partnership working with victims and survivors at the heart of its development. So the strategy has been developed around 3 pillars: needs, the past and the future. The needs of victims and survivors change over time and with experiences and events. A key point we heard in engaging with the victims and survivors groups was that the strategy needed to have enough flexibility to be able to adapt to changes. This is a lesson from the previous 10-year strategy, as the environment in which the groups worked was drastically different by the end of the strategy to what it was in 2009 when it was first established. So this current strategy will retain flexibility as we continue to build upon the community-led service delivery model and invest in capacity of the sector through training and development. Dealing with the past is very important to victims and survivors, though we recognise that there are very different views on how this should be done. This strategy will enable continued work with the sector to give victims, survivors and their families options on meeting needs in the way that is most appropriate to each individual. We are aware that dealing with the past will remain difficult, and we are conscious of the strong opposition among many victims groups and local political parties to the Legacy Act, as well as the ongoing legislative process in Westminster that the previous panel mentioned around amendments and the ongoing possibility of court action. So this again highlights what I mentioned earlier about the need for flexibility to be able to adapt to those changes as and when they do come through. Looking to the future, the vision of the strategy is a trauma-informed society that addresses the needs of victims and survivors. So we will strive to accomplish this by supporting families and society to work towards breaking the chain of transgenerational trauma and ensuring that society is more aware of the impact of trauma and the specific needs of victims and survivors. So collaboration across government, statutory agencies and especially the community and voluntary sector will be essential in meeting these commitments. We're currently continuing to develop specific operational action plans and identify resources required to take forward the commitments outlined in the strategy, along with our co-design partners in CVS and VSS. So some of the early actions which will be taken forward include our initial focus, which is the design and implementation of new VSS funding programmes, which we expect to have in place by the 1st of April 2026. This is essential activity needed to implement many of the commitments in the strategy by ensuring that services are appropriate to meet the changing needs of victims and survivors. We are also taking forward in the early stages preparation for a scoping exercise to consider the potential need for a capital programme for victims and survivors groups. And we will continue working closely with the Department of Health on implementation of Phase 1 of the Regional Trauma Network. This phase is specifically for victims and survivors and aims to create a world-leading mental health service, offering high-quality, effective treatment to address the needs of those affected by the past. The RTN is supported by the delivery of the VSS Peace Plus programme, which helps fund the network of health and wellbeing caseworkers and case management supporting the victims. Medium and longer term actions include rolling out trauma-informed practice and education to the sector and wider society, further research led by CVS on transgenerational trauma, building on the studies previously conducted, and the longer term organisational transition required to support victims and survivors' changing needs as well as the changing needs of society. As well as the uncertainty that I've mentioned, the key challenges will include the availability of resources. Ministers have consistently protected the victims' budget, a position which was maintained by officials in the absence of ministers, and ensured that VSS did not receive the same cuts experienced by other ALBs. While this protection has been welcomed by the section, there are understandably calls for more resources, as we've just heard, to continue to support the good work they do. We are all aware, however, of the continuing challenging financial climate and the competing priorities, including areas in TEO that have not received the same protection, as well as wider executive priorities, including in health and education. A specific challenge for us will be looking forward to the end of the Peace Plus programme that I've mentioned, which will close in 2028 and supports a significant amount of current activity. So we will continue to closely engage with the Department of Finance on this to ensure that victims and survivors are not negatively impacted by the end of the programme. So thank you for the opportunity to make a few remarks, and we look forward to working with the committee and to taking any views or feedback.
Thank you very much. Ladies, have you anything to add at this point? No. Okay, thank you. So you have answered my first question there, Patrick, and that was around the timing for the new funding programmes, but have you got a time that you're working towards for the specific action plans? You said you're currently working on them. When do you think those will be ready? Or
yeah, so where the focus, because of the lead-in time needed for the new funding programmes, that's the real focus at the minute, working with VSS. So we need to get the business case and all the groundwork done in VSS, then go out to an open call for groups to come forward to apply and bid, to then have it ready by April 26. So that explains that lead-in time. Okay. So that's the focus which Sinead and team are working on at the minute. In tandem then we're keeping going on the action plans and trying to get the priorities. So again, welcome any priorities that can feed into that. And when those are ready, happy to give a high level overview of those whenever they get. We'll obviously have quite a lot of operational documents and a lot of work that will be taken forward in tandem. But those three priorities that I mentioned are the real main ones, and all attention at the minute is basically on the funding programmes, because we know that'll pick up a huge amount of what's included in the strategy will all be covered by getting the funding programmes right.
Of course. So you talk in the strategy about a designated public space of reflection. Can you talk to us about what progress has been made? I know the strategy is only 4.5 months, but even if you've got a sort of direction of travel of how you are going to look at that.
And at the minute, to be honest, that's not something that's been prioritised. It's included in the strategy, which is a 10-year strategy. That came from a working group that the CVS led on. So the co-design, which I think we mentioned in our paper, there was all victims groups, all funded victims groups, plus anyone else who was involved and interested, and then we had the consultation, and that was something that came up from one of our 4 working groups, was the whole theme of acknowledgement. But I will admit that, again, with the focus on services, that's the main thing at the minute. Okay, so the last one really for me is in terms of, you've said that you're looking for opportunities for strategic alignment across government, looking at initiatives to support reconciliation and the development of a shared and better future. So I'm conscious that the NIO consulting with parties at the minute around the remedial work to the Legacy Act, and obviously this will be a core part of that. What discussions and engagement are you having with the NIO in terms of sort of trying to consolidate some of this work, and also then in terms of the Irish government? With the NIO at the minute, we know that the Commissioner of Victims and Survivors, who have that statutory role to represent the interests, have been doing a lot of engagement, obviously in the absence of a Commissioner at the minute. And we know, as David mentioned earlier, the VSS have been discussing. That's something, just with the uncertainty and also very early stages and our focus on ensuring the services are in place, it's not something that we have engaged with at the minute, but certainly keeping a watching brief as there's any legislative changes and developments. Okay, you've just reminded me something. Any update on when we're going to see the Commissioner? Well, the interview process has concluded, so successful candidates will be meeting ministers at the next stage, and then ministers will make a decision after that. That's good, thank you. Go ahead, please, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for that, and for the copy of the new strategy report which you have presented to us, which is helpful. But having listened to the previous panel of speakers. There's clearly a shift in emphasis required in where we go going forward. Carl made reference to the intergenerational aspects of where we are today, but also those who are currently victims are ageing, so the services required undoubtedly will have changed over the period of the last report and will continue to change over the period of the next report. So can you point to us and show us in the report where you've taken account of those changes in terms of age and demographics going forward? That's my first question.
I think that's something that came up, time and time again in the consultant and engagement, and find the exact in the principles. We wanted to put that in one of the principles up first and foremost, that it'll be reflective of the diverse needs. But a key theme throughout, and I think it's mentioned a couple of times, is the word flexibility, which I've mentioned earlier. That is the need that even now, if we set a strategy for 10 years, in 6, 7, 8 years' time, that the needs will have changed again, and we don't want to have to come back and revise a strategy completely just to be able to meet those needs. So we want to give VSS the scope in designing their funding programs to be able to be adaptive and flexible and meet those needs as and when they arise. So that's, again, one of the main things that we're building into the design of the new funding programs.
Given the length of time that all of this has been working through, and now you've come to a point that a new forward-looking programme is being delivered, one aspect that concerns me is the work that is done by TEO in respect of communities in transition. Two things about that. I think one, I would comment that there's an element of community scepticism about exactly what that means and how it's delivered. And secondly, how much longer are we expecting communities to remain in transition? When will they actually transition?
Maybe can't answer the specifics of the community transition programme question, but we certainly recognise there's a very direct link, because a lot of victims would live in those communities. So while everyone in those programmes is not necessarily a victim, there are a lot of victims who live. So it's trying to think, somebody said it earlier, around making sure that people are aware of the needs of victims. So that's a key element in us looking across society. And what we will start with is within TEO, within good relations programmes and community transition, so that if somebody who is a victim goes out and engages with those other programmes, they will be treated with all the respect and the trauma-informed way that somebody will know exactly what it is that they're dealing with and how to make sure that they're not putting them at a discomfort and exacerbating any trauma. So that intention is to start with what's in TEO, as well as looking across other departments. We have very good relationships with DOJ and the Department of Health, and we'll expand those across other departments. And then wider public sector, and obviously the very important role of the community voluntary sector as well.
The executive summary of your report says, in respect of communities in transition, that this project is designed to support ambitious initiatives which will build the capacity of individuals and groups to effect positive change for themselves and their communities. But you've already been doing that. When are we going to actually see the change?
Sorry, which
report
is that in?
That's page 32, I believe, in the glossary of terms and references.
I'm not sure if that's our report in the Victims and Survivors strategy. If that's in the community transition team, that would be a different team who, as I say, we will have good relationship with and work closely with because of that knock-on impact. But the specific questions around
is in your strategy for the victims and survivors and troubles conflict.
Yes, it is that we will work with the community transitions team for the impacts on victims, but very specifically around the impacts on victims. So I wouldn't be able to answer on the wider aims of the community and transition programme, but on working within those communities to make sure that all their programmes are fully informed about the needs of victims and survivors, which comes under our own responsibility.
So in terms of this strategy, this actually forms a very small part of the specific area in terms of communities in transition, and that's a much wider piece of work that falls outside this work.
So communities in transition is a separate piece of work and a separate division within the executive office.
But it's nevertheless within this report as well.
I think we will work closely with that division, but that's a whole...
That's not what it says here. I mean, it gives a very clear description of what communities in transition are.
Yes, again, which is a definition to inform any readers of the report when we reference that we'll be working with them of what that entails, so that people are aware of what communities in transition is, rather than just having a title.
Thank you.
Okay, Carol, please.
Thank you. So some of the areas of concern have been, just even setting this aside, that different panels, so for example like the Truth Recovery Panel or different panels of victims and survivors, have felt, and it was even raised again, and you heard that yourself, that when it comes to resources and it comes to inclusion, the procurement exercise goes out to one big group, and regardless of your own experience or your pathway to trauma and your life after that, you're just all victims. Where in this strategy do you see the evidence that, first of all, that that's not going to happen again, and there's an element of a bespoke service to deal with particularly the conflict?
So I think the main bit where that's picked up is the work we've done around the Regional Trauma Network. So the Regional Trauma Network is a commitment, as you'll know, from the Stormont House Agreement, and that the whole purpose of that is to connect the community and voluntary groups that are very specifically working with victims with the statutory services. So one of the previous panel had mentioned around that trusted route in, and that we know, some victims are reluctant to go to their GP, they're reluctant to go to primary care or to the hospital, but they'll go to a group that they trust. So what that Regional Trauma Network does is connects the group directly to the teams, the psychologist teams and the psychiatric teams in the health trusts. And those relationships have really developed really well over the last couple of years between the 6 lead groups, who then have links to the other 42, I think it is, funded groups. Have worked really well with the trust, so that there's those direct connections. It avoids having to send somebody, I think everyone has experienced being passed card to post.
Sorry, Patrick, for interrupting you. Who's the 6 lead groups again?
Relatives for Justice, SEF, we have Ashton, Cuniv and Ely.
Okay. So they're well established and have got good credibility. In terms of the co-production and co-design of this, in terms of the stakeholders' involvement, were any of the 6 groups involved in this? The co-design, co-production of it?
All were.
All were. And so, for example, we've had, as you know, even through different things, we've had groups come to us at this committee saying, yeah, there were the strategy that fed into consultation, but they kind of don't see themselves in a policy document. So that won't be the case for this. In terms of resources, how are we going to ensure that this is resourced? I appreciate we've only got one annual budget, and the direction of travel should be a multi-year budget, but this is going to be an executive priority going forward. So, when would you see this whole strategy hitting the ground running?
Well, April 26 is the first main date for services, because that's the current funding programme has been extended to the end, so that's what we're working towards. Look, I'd said earlier around the challenges across the whole system, not even just within TO. We know that we have that protection that other divisions haven't had. But I think the main message probably that we'd want to get across around resources is around the Peace Programme and Peace Plus. That has been excellent for victims and survivors. It's funded the health and wellbeing caseworkers, which underpins a lot of what is done. So that's what our focus will be on, making sure that we are fully involved with all discussions around what's going to come next, because 2028 could be quite quick coming around.
Was that with the Special European Programmes body?
SEUPB, yeah.
Because you heard David Crabb there earlier. I mean, they are totally reliant on SEUPB, European funding, and without it, they're not going to survive. So are those discussions happening now, Patrick?
So those would be, from what we work very closely with DOF, like that's way above my head at the minute. There's intergovernmental discussions, and then between the main departments in each jurisdiction, but certainly we'll be every opportunity we get putting in the victims is a key element that needs to be considered in any decisions on replacement or changes to that. So at the minute we know that that's a big line, and 2028 that we're very aware of, and I know the groups are very aware of, and that comes with it, with people's jobs and contracts and everything is tied into that, as well as obviously the most important, the victims who are getting supported. So that's a real priority. I don't have the answers yet, but just to assure the committee that's something we're aware of.
It's assuring that the conversations have been had well in advance of 2028. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Harry,
Thank
please.
you.
Thank you very much, Chair. You had mentioned that the victims, survivors are at the heart of all you do. I'm just wondering, would that be something that you check up feedback on regular
times from the 6 lead groups to make sure that the victims and survivors are at the heart and they're
Absolutely. So, I think everyone will understand the role of the groups and the really close connections they have with people who've been through such trauma. So we wouldn't pretend that we're the experts or we have all those relationships that have been built up over years of trust that the groups have. But we certainly, I would like to think we have very good relationships with not just those 6 groups, but with other groups, and would regularly engage with them. And then obviously VSS are the main body funding the groups and who have those relationships. And I suppose another factor that's very important, especially with David being here and being a member of the Victims Forum, is that we work with our other co-design partner, CVS, and engage regularly with the forum. The Regional Trauma Network, we have set up a service users group that David himself is part of and could have given a mention to, and just trying to make sure that we're always taking that voice in, but with the drawback that we don't have as much direct relationships, so we have to go on what the groups are telling us, but we certainly know the groups have built those over many years.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, Harry. Timothy, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, and the hard copy, I certainly appreciate it. So then just starting off, so the vision, a trauma-informed society that addresses the needs of victims and survivors. And we read trauma-informed or trauma-aware is one of the titles. I'm particularly interested in victim-centred approach, where it talks about avoids re-traumatisation. Is that something that seriously informs the work of the Executive Office, and in particular the ministers?
Well, I'm here as an official, so I know that we certainly do everything we can to avoid re-traumatisation, to work with those who are the experts in helping people who have suffered trauma, which I've said is the groups, to learn from them, to take their views and things and feedback their views. So the part of the co-design process for this involved all the groups with separate working groups that had the victims groups involved, took their experience, some of them victims themselves with lived experiences, some of them speaking on behalf of victims, and then a wider consultation that any individual victim and survivor can come forward to. So that is all fed into the development of the strategy.
So I could be taking you out of context. The Executive Office, absolutely, this is their approach.
The strategy has been agreed by the First Minister and Deputy First Minister and endorsed by the wider executive.
So essentially that should be their approach as well. So when it comes to day and daily life, essentially what you have outlined in this document, and the principles that have outlined regarding victim-centred approach and avoid re-traumatisation should be put first and foremost in front of photograph moments, opportunities, and indeed anything in the news that might improve their PR.
Well, the strategy underpins everything that we do to support victims, to help them get over their trauma, to help them with the Victims Payments Board, anything they looking at the past and to the future. So basically the 3 pillars and the strategy underpinning everything that we are going forward. So this is commitments to the future, which, as I said to a previous question, we're then developing action plans to implement, and the main one of those is the new funding programme to meet those needs in the best way we can.
Yeah, that all sounds good, but I want to read you out a quote here from Stephen Galt, who lost his father in the Poppy Day massacre and was himself seriously injured. This is what he had to say about the First Minister attending City Hall. I just think it's hypocritical, particularly when in the past she has failed to condemn what the IRA did. There will be people going to the annual remembrance service to commemorate those that were murdered. I understand that we have to move forward, but you can't move forward if you don't condemn the past. If there's no justice, history will keep repeating itself. She could go to the cenotaph on a Sunday in Belfast, and then the next day she could be going to an IRA commemoration of Coke or wherever it is and eulogise what the IRA did. Does that sound like a trauma-informed society and a trauma-informed decision where the First Minister was going to go to Enniskillen, bearing in mind what the IRA done on the 8th of November 1987?
Timothy, I don't think that's an appropriate question for an official.
It might not be, but we're here to talk about the TEO, the strategy. Lovely glossy book, but it doesn't hold up any weight unless it's lived out by the officials. And what I'm simply pointing out to you is when we're talking about victim-centred approach avoids re-traumatisation. That is exactly what that PR stunt was meant for last year.
In talking about the strategy, which is my area of responsibility, it was co-designed with victims groups. We had very positive responses. The consultation went out and we had 70, 80, 90% agreeing with what we put forward. And it's informing exactly what we want to do, which under page 15 is around support and enable victims and survivors to improve their health and well-being and addressing factors which impact on them. That's our focus, and that's what we will be doing throughout this strategy over the next 10 years to try and help people in their daily lives.
Yeah, but you can understand why people will look at this and look at the actions of those ministers in the executive office, the department that you are here representing. The First Minister, it flies in the face of that. But I will move on. So the TE office or the TEO will promote the Day of Reflection. Now, we've heard from the previous panel, obviously the concerns from Ulster Human Rights Watch that they have that victims are lumped in with the perpetrators or victim makers. So the TEO is going to support that day. Does the TEO support the European Day of Victims of Terrorism?
The proposal to support that day, I think, did it come from CVS's acknowledgement paper? So from the Commission's, as I said earlier, the working groups we set up to design this, one was on acknowledgement and on how we acknowledge what happened in the past. And one of the recommendations came out to support that day, which was put into our draft strategy, worked with all the funded victims groups, and we didn't hear any opposition to that. That has been supported. I know indeed the ministers have been supportive of that. The junior ministers went to an event last year in St Anne's Cathedral and have been invited again this year. So that's where that came about from the engagement of the strategy.
Yeah, so what are you for doing going forward to support that day? And because of the concerns that have been raised by the Ulster Human Rights Watch, will there be a review of supporting the day in June? The Day of Reflection?
The day on the 21st of June.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was saying. That's what is included in the strategy, which wasn't. There was no opposition to it whenever this was put through. Extensive co-design with the victims and survivors groups. That it was supported. There was no opposition to it when it came through the consultation process that was open to the public. So that has been included in the strategy. And as I said, ministers have already shown that they support the Day of Reflection on the 21st of June by attending an event they were invited to at St Anne's Cathedral last year.
Yeah. So based on the evidence session that we heard that there has been concerns raised, is that something you'll be taking back to the department to review the support of that day? But my question is, what are you going to do to support the European Victims' Day in March?
As I said, the strategy has is committed to supporting the Day of Reflection on the 21st of June, which is what we're working towards, and we'll be looking with CVS and others and the victims groups on how best we can promote that.
So what are you doing in for the European Victims' Day?
At the minute, that's not something that has is included in the strategy.
So, based on your attendance today, and you're sitting at the back of the room, when we had Ulster Human Rights Watch were very clear, setting out their objections and why they have concerns for the day in June, and they think that the day in March, European Victims' Day, is a better way to highlight what has happened in this country because of the years of terrorism. So on the back of that, will you be trying to support that? Like we have heard, and one of the suggestions I put to them was about this committee potentially putting forward instead of a single member to have the building lit up. And at the end of this, I will be asking the committee for their support that the committee puts it forward to show that we are firmly behind innocent victims. But I'm interested to know what we use.
I think that's maybe one that you should put a question in to the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. They are here to deliver on the strategy. They're not here to make the policy and determine what the ministers do.
Yeah. Well, on the back of that, I certainly would appreciate if you would take away the comments that we've heard from the panel today and the concerns, and also the suggestion that policy documents going forward include the European Victims' Day for it.
Yeah, if I could just clarify that both also Human Rights Watch and the Quorum, were fully involved in our co-design process, both fully engaged, attended co-design events. We were out, Sinead and I were out in Bangor to meet the Quorum one-on-one basis, so we have that relationship, and certainly always happy to engage with groups going forward if they want to come to us.
Okay, thank you. Sinead, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the panel for their briefing and update on strategy. It's indicated the measures of success for the aspects of the strategy will be the improvement on the percentage of victims and survivors who engage with institutions and will feel more confident in doing so. Do you think the department should have specific targets in relation to the level of improvement of support rather than just engagement? Lots of us can engage in services, but that doesn't measure really success of those services.
Thanks, Sinead. That's something that we grappled with for a long while around the indicators and outcomes. I think one of the previous panel mentioned the challenge with the majority of victims that we all know are not engaged with groups, and reaching them is very challenging. So just to maybe distinguish, I'm not exactly sure your question is around the services or around the advocacy. On the services, we have about the percentage of victims reporting an improvement in health and wellbeing. We know that 80%, if I get the figures, 82% of people who engaged in complementary therapies have reported improvement. 61% who've engaged in psychological therapies have reported improvement. So I think there is evidence that people are improving through the work that VSS do through CoreNet, and we'll hopefully be getting even more of that through the Regional Trauma Network with the data and the outcomes framework that's being developed there. On advocacy, I think your point is very valid, and I would love if it was a very easy one to say what does improvement mean in terms of support for engagement institutions. But first of all, there's the uncertainty around what institutions are going to exist, what format are they going to be in 6 months' time, never mind in 10 years' time. And then there's the point around accessing those victims who haven't come forward. So one of the things we're trying to do around indicators and outcomes is the surveys, and I think Sinead will maybe get the names of the surveys for us, but putting questions in surveys to try and understand at a population level across Northern Ireland what's happening from people who define as victims. So I don't know if Sinead wants to say any more.
Yeah, so we've been working closely with our own TEO statisticians, and they are helping us set a baseline by putting questions into the continuous household survey, and we will hopefully do that year on year to see how things are improving through the lifetime of the strategy. And we're also working with CVS. They have a population survey that's hopefully going to go out reasonably soon, and again that will ask some of the important questions and give us measurement against what we've committed to.
Okay. Thank you, Sinead, for that. And are there any concerns or challenges ensuring that victim support is mainstreamed through public policy, and that all departments kind of adopt a trauma-led approach in aspects that are not directly addressed through your strategy? And just earlier on we talked about intergenerational trauma and just the growth of it and the insufficient level of services to deal with that. And that's across government, really, because we have various departments that are leading the way in specific areas of say, for example, mental health, the Department of Health and others. And I'm just, wondering, are we working in silos here, or can we work across government to kind of reach that insurmountable level of intergenerational trauma that we experience here? Because again, it's just the definition of what is a victim and how wide that actually is, and how flexible the strategy can be in order to deal with that trauma in our youth.
I can come in on that. I think on your first point about working across government, we recognise that victims' issues aren't just for TEO, it's not just our concern, and we recognise that we do need to work across other departments. So we will be working to, we have had initial discussions with officials in other departments to raise awareness of the strategy initially, and we would intend to work with them closely again just on different policies, strategies that they have and how victims and survivors' issues can feed into those. So again, at the early stages, because we're concentrating on services and funding at the minute, but it is something that we'll be doing across the lifetime of the strategy. And with the intergenerational, transgenerational issues, we're very aware of those. CVS has had research conducted on that, and we're working with the VSS and the groups around those issues and how we can address them.
I just added an example of the intergenerational work is through the Regional Trauma Network. There's a children's and young people group that is working on parenting programs and psychoeducation programs for those parents who've experienced trauma, so then they do not pass that on to their children. So there's a lot of good work going on. Again, it's early stages, it's pilots, but it's good work, and that's being led, in the spirit of the whole RTN is the health and social care and the trusts working together with the groups hand in hand and driving that forward together. So that's something that we hope to have more about in future.
Patrick, that kind of probably leads me on to just my final question. Is this a very live document that can be flexible and move once you are in receipt of some of that data and information, so that the services that are facing into victims can be best, used in order to support them?
Yeah, I hope so anyway, and the test will be when something comes up that we need to change. So the challenge we had was to have it open enough that it can be adaptive and flexible to changes, but also if it's too open, then it becomes a bit meaningless. So trying to get that balance and to get that tension right, and I think time will tell, but it's been something that's been at the forefront of any engagement with the ESS, is that new programs need to be able to change. We need to be able to react and adapt as some new information comes to light and respond, because if victims have a need, we need to do our best to try and meet it there and then, and not wait for a new strategy in 10 years to come around.
Yeah, and I suppose just looking at the money that we have, it's, we don't have big pockets, but looking even within the TEO department, looking at, for example, CIT and TBUC, and that, there's synergy in and around all of these that needs to work better together in order to meet the needs of the victims and survivors, and widen that out to ensure that we capture everyone that should and deserves support and services.
Absolutely. Just one last point on that is that there are both the very specific needs from someone who experienced trauma through violence or through conflict, and then there's the wider societal needs. So it's trying to do both at the same time. We don't want to just open it up to wider society and forget that individual is a very specific need who are supported through very specific groups set up for a direct purpose. So it's trying to get that balance of making sure the direct support for those individuals in the environment in which they're trusted, where they've built up trust over decades, is still maintained, while also then looking at how we meet the wider societal needs.
I agree. I totally accept that. Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you to the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead. Brian, please.
Thank you. Just to pick on two of the comments you heard earlier. One was regarding those trauma services, counselling support and so on, and the views expressed that of those being delivered through organisations would understand the context, particularly for members of security forces who are serving, and maybe going to a community group and feeling that people don't understand the whole context, that people were serving in, and just the volume of incidents that were happening. Is that something that you have reviewed, or is support given, if I can use that example of the members of security forces, is support provided in a context which is both they feel safe and secure, as was said earlier?
Certainly, and that's something that we're very conscious of in VSSR as well, of different people feel comfortable in different environments. First of all, there's geography to make sure that people don't have to travel too far, but then importantly, community background and views, and where they will feel trust and feel secure. So it's something that we try to factor in to make sure that people have choice. So victims have a choice of a group they can trust. And I suppose an example I can give you is the Victims Payment Scheme. So we would fund a number of groups who help applicants with their application. So there are 5 main groups that we would fund through that, which is a spread of those groups who have built that trust over years. But we identified a gap that there was a number of applicants from the previous police officers who were not comfortable maybe going forward to a group, and had issues around their security and just didn't have that confidence and trust. So we are now funding the PSNI development, or benevolent fund, so that they can do the same role that the victims and survivors groups are doing. So they are funded with caseworkers who will then support the applicant in that confident way, knowing exactly their background, knowing exactly the implications, their fears and their worries. So that's just an example of how we try to react they weren't initially included, but that came up as a live issue, and then we responded to put in place those caseworkers, and then have extended them so that they're in place as long as they'll be needed.
Okay, and the other question is the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme, and for people who were not physically present at the incident of a bombing, shooting, or whatever the incident was, which I think I understand is a criteria for a payment, but people still, whether you heard earlier about widows and children, people whose lives were severely affected and damaged, through a Troubles incident, what financial support is available and open to them?
Yeah, so first of all, I would, if you get me, first of all, like, absolute sympathy for the people who can never imagine what those people have gone through and how that impacts them to this day. We know the Victims Payment Scheme itself obviously was designed and developed by the UK government without input from the Executive Office, and has that specific aim around those who've suffered a permanent disablement. But there is the support for the bereaved that TAO have been providing since, I think, 2017. Is that right? 2017
when it closed for the first time, and it was reopened again. It was reopened again by ministers in recognition that new bereaved, or not newly bereaved people, new clients were coming to the service who had been bereaved, and it was to provide services for them. So this financial year they have had the VSS has spent 2.1 million to just over 3,500 bereaved individuals, and of them just over 1,000 of them are new clients since the scheme was reopened.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Nobody else has indicated.
Yeah, could I just ask one final point? We have on page 20. It says engage with the Irish and UK governments to ensure that they're aware of the needs of victims and survivors and the potential impact on individual and communities of failing to meet those needs. Yes, I understand it was late October that this was approved, but can you detail, based on what we heard in the last panel, both from David and Axel, that the Republic, there's a big problem there, there's a big concern there. There's an acknowledgement that the Irish Republic has been used as a safe haven. There's either multitude of bombs built in the south, or people from the south come over to carry out atrocities. They have a massive part to play. Have you had any engagement, as is outlined in your document, with the Irish government since?
The specific focus of the strategy then was around meeting those needs. So one of the things this came about from was I was down in Dublin by a session organised by SEF with victims and survivors from the Republic of Ireland, and went down and heard from them around the access to services and support that victims have here that is not replicated down there. Now, we know that there is the PEACE programme works in the border counties areas, so there's some access, but there was a clear sense of hurt and anger almost that they do not have the same support. So that's something that we wanted to put in the strategy that would be able to influence in the way in that victims who are victims of what happened here but are living elsewhere then can then access that support in different areas. So we have had, since October, we haven't had any specific engagement with this, but there has been good engagement, in one, through the PEACE programme, I suppose that has been ongoing, and two, in things like the victims' payments. We engaged with officials in the Republic on a benefits disregard. So if somebody received a payment from the victims' payments, that didn't impact then their benefits in the Republic, and they were very obliging, very helpful in that. So that's what we have done in the past, and we'll obviously look to build on that. And I suppose I should say that we've equally met with victims who live in Britain at the minute, and had the same meeting, and heard very similar that they feel forgotten because they don't live in Northern Ireland. So that's what that was in for, to try and engage and make sure that support is provided wherever people live.
Well, essentially, when you're having future engagements with the Irish government, it'll be on twofold. It'll be on future financial support for victims, and as well as making sure they're open and honest and fully buying into the processes of trying to investigate those in the south.
That second would be a matter for the NIO. The Legacy Act is a matter under the NIO remit, as well as the ICRR. So engagement on that, would be outside of my control, because we have no involvement in the development of that. As I said, it's gone through the UK government, so that would be a matter for them to take forward. Our role would certainly be around services and around making sure that people are supported and sharing basically best practice that we, well, I say we, but I mean everyone here, but obviously the victims groups here have developed over years and have that practice of how to support victims and know a lot about their needs, that we would want to share or facilitate them sharing with people in the Republic of Ireland and in Great Britain.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Please
Thank
keep
you.
us updated in
Thank
terms
you.
of the action plans and anything else that's coming out of your work. But thanks for
very
now.
much.
Okay, members, just take a breath then. Before we move on then to the fair employment order,
Yeah, there's
Go
a
ahead.
couple of things
go ahead.
I'd like to raise from that. As I said during both sessions, I would like this committee. It's obviously been missed essentially. I don't want to say forgotten about, but it's certainly not included in this regarding the European Day of Remembrance for Victims of Terrorism. I think it would send a strong message that instead of an individual MLA and 2 others putting in for this building to be lit up red, which was happened in the past, I would like this committee to put in, put that proposal and put in that request.
It's a matter for the Commission.
Yeah, okay, do you,
Sorry, I was just going to, if I can give you some clarification. So it's an application process to the Commission and it's a decision for the Commission. Can I go away and get some information about what their process is and bring it back to the committee?
Yeah.
okay, report back.
I'll
Okay.
report back.
Yeah,
And
that's
the other
okay.
thing was on the Victims Payment Scheme. Ulster Human Rights Watch had mentioned about they have written off regarding inclusion of widows and children into the scheme. Is that something that this committee wants to add their support to? I certainly would encourage that. It's open to other members. I certainly propose, I think it'd be something that'd be good from this committee. We've heard firsthand that the scheme needs to be extended, and I think it's something this committee should write off in support of.
Okay, Carol, go ahead.
So I too have problems with the scheme in terms of if you didn't witness the event, then you don't meet the criteria, and I think it's far too narrow because the trauma is felt by everybody and it does go through generations. I think we would need to meet with a panel and we can put those questions to them rather than just, I think it's fair to everybody that they need to get that information and put their concerns forward, because it's not the only issue. The issue, and David mentioned it, it's the length of time it's taken to get applications, and the information that's needed is often repetitive, and it's effectively, there are groups there who are helping victims and survivors, it's causing difficulties for everybody across the board.
Okay, Brian, would you like to say something?
Yeah, but if we could get a briefing on the criteria for the permanent disablement payment, but also the one that Sinead, then when I asked the question, the support for the bereaved
Yes.
through TEO, just again, what are the criteria for that and how that has been promoted? Just in the first place, even if we could get those
I totally agree.
under our AOB, whatever,
So would
in our
that
next
be,
pack.
thank you, would that maybe be raised, or do you think maybe the committee team could pull that information together?
I think we could write to the department and ask them to set out for us the criteria, the specific criteria that are being referred to here for the permanent disablement payment, if I'm understanding you correctly. And I think we can also ask them to give us information about the criteria and background to the support for the bereaved services that TEO are providing. Is that what, am
Yes.
So
I capturing you correctly?
We'll get that, we'll have it in the pack, we'll discuss it, and then we'll possibly then invite them to come before us, and we can, as Carol and yourself have suggested. Go ahead, please.
Jerry, just in relation to the point Timothy was raising about the European Day of Remembrance with regards to victims of terrorism, and it seems that the groups have some consensus in respect of that, but it just there's no hierarchy of Remembrance Days, but the 21st of August marks International Day with regards to remembrance and tribute to victims of terrorism, and that's a United Nations resolution to which the United Kingdom has signed up and marks. So perhaps that might be a more appropriate day for this Assembly to consider.
Okay,
It's
thank
in
you.
August. Did you
It's
say?
21st of August, yeah.
Obviously the Assembly wouldn't be sitting there.
Oh no, it doesn't. But
Building will be lit up.
It's a lighting up of the building. normally.
The European Victims Day is in a number of weeks away, so if we're to make a decision,
Well, but the clerk's undertaken to go
Yeah.
away and look at that. Okay, I'm
I'm
going
not
to...
opposed to it, just saying that there are other
Other
dates,
options.
and I think it's important that we ultimately, the executive office, look at those dates.
Okay, thank you. So, members, moving on with the agenda there, item 8 is the SL1, the Fair Employment Specification of Public Authorities, Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2025. So, members, you'll find the clerk's brief at page 62, and you'll find the SL1 letter containing the draft statutory rule and explanatory memorandum at page 64. So the Executive Office is proposing to make a statutory rule subject to the negative resolution procedure, to make a statutory rule that will allow for the Executive Office to amend those public bodies who are to be regarded as public authorities for the purposes of the Fair Employment and Treatment Northern Ireland Order 1998. In the brief, it states there that the amendments apply to any public bodies established, wound up, or whose name may have been changed since the last amendment. I'm just wondering if members have any views on whether they're content with this proposal.
Well, it's fairly straightforward. I looked at it.
Yeah.
Content, Chair, and certainly from the past, what happened was there was a prescribed list, and then complaints came forward, and you couldn't bring a complaint against a particular new organisation that had been created. So this is a much better way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
So we're content then.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, so item 9 there, the inquiry into gaps in equality legislation. So refer members to page 78 of the pack for a revised options paper following the end of oral and written submissions last week. Just to remind you that we previously considered an interim report summarising the evidence received during the inquiry and agreed that the clerk would prepare an options paper for the committee prior to making recommendations. So we have agreed for a closed session to discuss recommendations at our committee meeting on the 5th of March. So the papers today are really for noting.
Yeah.
And so I've just asked members in the interim to consider the options paper and to forward any comments or suggestions you have to the clerk so that these can be collated for our discussion on the 5th of March. Is that
Great.
Okay. Thank
we
you.
get the new contact details? If Roisin, are you the clerk going forward?
Yes, if you send anything to the general committee email address, or you can send it to me, I'll email afterwards everybody with my email address. It's the usual assembly, russian.kelly@niassembly.gov.uk.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much. So item 10, you'll find the draft for work programme at page 84 of your pack. So first is to seek agreement for relatives for justice to come to the committee next week to discuss legacy issues. Are members agreed?
Great.
Agreed, okay. And just to advise members that Survivors Together have agreed to attend the committee on the 19th of March, but they've requested that their evidence be received in closed session. You'll remember Cyril came with the historical institutional abuse.
Yes.
Are we content?
Yeah, well, we've done that before. Yeah.
With these types of,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
we agreed.
Yeah.
Are members generally content then to proceed with the remaining briefings as set out in the work programme?
Yeah.
Could I add in a couple of suggestions? One of the suggestions relates to question time. Was it Monday or Tuesday that the Deputy First Minister took when I had asked about how TO officials respond and the time that they respond to written questions? The Deputy First Minister made the point that it's more difficult in the office because there's two people that have to agree. When I was looking down through those that haven't had a response from across the chamber, I noticed there's one from yourself, Chair, it was meant to be responded on the 23rd of the 10th. Regarding North Belfast Strategic Good Relations Programme. There's some of these basic things that the office aren't responding to in a timely manner, and as well without outside the standing orders. Is it possible that we could have a briefing to understand how long it should take, why when questions are being prepared and provided by civil servants they aren't being put and given back to members in a timely manner? Like, this isn't a single person or a single party.
I know. I think we all have some outstanding, as you say. Any other thoughts on this?
I mean, I think it's a political call, Timothy. It happens. Like, I have questions sitting there as well, from FM to FM waiting to be responded to, and indeed other departments.
Yeah.
And I've also noticed that many of us are putting in further to AQW, you know, as a response, or if you get the information that you feel isn't a wholesome response, then you're putting that in as well. So
The Speaker was very clear in his ruling the other day that that's...
No, I seen that, and but I mean, not unless we get somebody in from the business office just to go through that. But even at that, or it's probably the Dallo.
I think it's more...
Sorry, just let me bring the clerk in quickly.
It was really just to say that, if you like, I could go away and prepare a short briefing on the questions that go through in question time, either oral questions or written questions, and the Speaker's obviously made remarks in relation to that. And I could look at who we could ask to come and brief on that as a series of options, and you can make a decision then about who you want to ask in terms of what kind of answer you'll get from who you're asking, if you know what I mean, that will actually address your issues.
It's really to take forward from this committee that there's concerns on how that standing orders are being flaunted, and I know it's happening right across the different departments, but this is a TEO committee, and essentially the ministers are responsible to hear as to raise them concerns that answers aren't being given in a timely manner. And there's a lot of them basic, like the St Patrick's Day one as a figure that you can't disagree on what figure it cost.
Okay, well I think Oisin has offered to look into this. I suppose if you would like to add something to that, and it's maybe around us getting our papers in time, which is probably a more pertinent issue.
We maybe get a written briefing first, Chair, just on that, rather than, and then look, if needs be, we can take an oral briefing then after it.
Can we leave that with you?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So.
And is the First Minister and Deputy First Minister due to come before the committee again?
I don't think it's in the forward work programme, but there is.
I apologise, I don't know the answer to that question.
It's not. It's. There's no date right up until the 9th of April.
My clerk, it's just to be scheduled on the forward work programme.
Yeah, so it's on the forward work programme. It hasn't been scheduled. Okay. But it is there, I think. Okay, so I'm going to move on to correspondence, members. So page 94 of your pack, you'll find a summary. So I just want to draw your attention to correspondence at 11.4 from the Committee for Finance, urging the committee to ask the department what action they plan to take to respond to sick absence levels amongst its staff. So you'll see at page 125, figure 2, that TO has the third lowest absenteeism, but I think we're probably one of the smallest departments. So are you content that we write to the department to seek this information and that we'll be able to provide to that committee? Okay. Members, is there any other correspondence you'd wish to discuss?
No, it's just the correspondence from Detective Superintendent Fisher regarding historical institutional abuse and the redress. So I mean, I'm content enough with it that, you know, the police at that level have responded, because you were on the...
More stuff, yeah.
No, but even on the committee when we dealt with the whole scandal around Dr. Watt.
Oh yes, sorry, yes.
So it's important, and if it's going to be dealt at that level, I think that gives some reassurance. But there is clearly a lack of people coming forward.
Do you know what that struck me about it was the red writing across the top there, PSNI official, not to be shared without prior approval. I think this is probably information that the likes of Rosetta Trust, etc., would like to see.
I didn't get that.
So it's not at the top of it. It's
not.
Page 101, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Small red
sorry.
font there.
Right at the very top. So page 101, for example, it'll say. Sorry, it's not. It's,
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right.
Keep just going.
Yeah, the wee tiny. Yes.
The header.
But I just think that this is a sort of, especially the part about why cases haven't been taken forward in terms of achieving a criminal justice outcome and stuff. So I wonder, should we maybe go back and ask, could this be shared? Or ask Wets.
Well, I think I think that's a health warning on top of a lot of data that's put out.
Okay.
But I think if we went back and just asked for clarifications, because we're a public committee, these complaints and inquiries and indeed the panels all are done within a public forum.
Yeah.
And I think we have a duty to go back to those people to share what information we get.
Could we maybe look
But I do think it's a health warning, but you're better getting a clarification.
Yeah, we'll go back and check that. It might even be something. as we move forward after Easter, that
Yeah.
we might even ask them to come and present, because
Yeah.
the output. Go
Is
ahead.
the committee pack available online in the correspondence?
No.
So essentially, and we see in here, members of the public can't see. Yes, they could FOI it, but
The committee could choose to publish papers, but consideration needs to be given to any marking that comes on it. So,
Yeah.
as part of that process. But no, it's not automatically put into the public domain.
Okay.
So stop showing your papers, Timothy. With a newsletter.
oh, for goodness sake.
So what is the action then? We're going to maybe go back to PSNI and
Yes.
ask, or
I'll ask
even if
for-
they simplified it, or did something.
I'll
that
ask for
maybe-
clarification on what that means
Yes.
and
Just to explain about
explain what it is.
Yes.
Because the likes of Patricia Lundy, she's been working on this for years. There's people who've really been supporting that sector who I think would really appreciate it.
We could just note that Carl reads the newsletter. It's good to see.
I read all papers, Timothy. I'm open to reading everything.
Reading the truth.
Okay, listen, I'm going to move on.
I can go that far now.
Any other business members? No. Okay, good stuff. Okay, so next meeting scheduled same time next week.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30. Sound.